Welcome to Web3 Talks. I'm Sebastian from HOPR, and I'm super happy to have Tegan from The Graph and Edge a Note here. Tegan is somebody who has a joint passion for Web3 and privacy. And I'm super happy that we got here today to talk about Web3, what she's doing with Edge a Note and The Graph, and how it all fits together into this bigger picture of a better Web3. Tegan, welcome here. And why don't you start giving us a quick intro to yourself and your pretty interesting background coming kind of from not just the old world, but a very specific part of there. And, how does that connect to this new crypto world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Tegan Kline. I started my career in traditional finance. So I actually started in investment banking at Bank of America. I was in the financial institutions group there. So really kind of overseeing IPOs and M&As. And then I moved over to sales and trading at Barclays, kind of getting both sides of the investment banking coin, which was really great. It kind of lended itself well for me to see some of the not so bright sides of finance and some of the friction points and additional costs that banks add that aren't always necessary. And then it was when I learned about Ethereum in 2016 that I really saw a new opportunity to create a new internet, to create a new financial system. And so I dove in head first. I joined a project that was backed by Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia, trying to help everyone get equal access to the internet. And then from there, I brought a lot of that launch experience with me to the Graph ecosystem. And the Graph is all about kind of creating a more equitable and fair ecosystem where all data is open and public and verifiable. So really kind of focusing on the public side of data, but obviously we need the private side as well to go hand in hand with that. We launched Edge a Note, me and the original co-founders of The Graph, and we're really trying to kind of create, solidify the Web3 stack, but really kind of create this bright future where everyone kind of has the tools to make a difference in the world if they should choose to. So yeah, super excited to kind of dive in.
That's really interesting to hear your transition, from one world really to another. So, when I joined this Ethereum ecosystem, people talked about this world computer, and it seemed a little bit weird. And I think the narrative improved a little. So nowadays we call this Web3. And now there's a lot of stuff on Web3 going on. But before we dive into that, why don't you give us an overview of how The Graph, the project that you're working on right now, is fitting into this Web3 world vision?
Yeah, absolutely. So Web3 is a brand new platform for fully decentralized applications to live. And The Graph is really here kind of helping to pave a path forward for that future. We've been focused on Web3 for over 4 years, really focused on building decentralized, resilient, open source, permissionless technology. And so The Graph is core infrastructure that helps at the open data layer. So The Graph helps to organize data that's on blockchains. So an analogy I like to use is imagine you're walking into a library and all of the books are all over the floor and you want to find not only a specific book, but a specific page in that book. It's going to take you hours, if not days. That was like Ethereum before The Graph came in to organize all of the data. So now all of that data is organized, developers can find that data quickly. And now there's a bunch of users that can load applications really quickly because The Graph is there solving that pain point. And so The Graph is really there to help every use case, every blockchain, and really kind of connect and unite the Web3 space. So that way we can kind of build this great future together.
Cool. Actually, speaking of the future, there's been a lot of talks recently on The Graph being used, not just by applications like HOPR, where, by the way, using The Graph on multiple occasions is really useful to see, how this kind of complicated on-chain data set gets kind of consumable for devs. But tell us a little bit, how does this fit into the wider and future Web3 ecosystem? I think actually also recently Vitalik was mentioning The Graph on an outlook for Ethereum. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a really exciting moment. So how it started is Yaniv, Brandon, and Giannis, they come from developer tools in Web2, Microsoft, MuleSoft, Salesforce, Cisco, the list goes on. And so they really understood the stack. And when they came to build an application on blockchains, at the time it was Ethereum, it was in 2017, Ethereum was really the only option. And they realized this very core piece of the stack was missing. So they couldn't build their application without this piece of the stack. And it doesn't make sense to put centralized stuff on top of decentralized blockchains. And so they built it in a decentralized way, thinking about decentralization from day one. And so the graph is supporting like now over 31 different blockchains. Also so there's Ethereum, there's Avalanche, Celo, but also layer twos like Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, and then storage networks like IPFS. And so really the graph is here to support every option, every network within the Web3 space that shares the values of Bitcoin, shares the values of Ethereum, shares the values of this open source, decentralized, permissionless future that we're all building.
Awesome. And maybe you mentioned some examples. So could you maybe give me some of the big ones that use the graph? Like I think Uniswap is using the graph. Give our listeners who might not be so familiar with the graph this far some idea like who's using the graph and like for what.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really hard to build on a blockchain without the graph. So DeFi applications like Uniswap, Synthetix, Aave, Gnosis, Numerai, they pull together, they all leverage the technology from the graph. They build subgraphs, which are open APIs. So you are familiar with like closed APIs. So for example, Facebook, LinkedIn, you can't take that data and port it to your application because they have closed APIs. Within the graph, all the APIs are open. And this exploded the innovation within DeFi because everyone could see that the data was transparent and everyone could leverage it to build upon it, like Lego building blocks. And we've seen this a lot with Uniswap. The Uniswap API is open via a subgraph. And so Coinbase queries that subgraph. A bunch of different wallets like Rainbow Wallet, they leverage that data from that subgraph. So it's been really exciting, but beyond DeFi, like every use case. So NFTs, you can think like Zora, Known Origin, Art Blocks, like all of these marketplaces that believe in decentralization are leveraging the graph. And then also DAOs. So a bunch of DAOs leverage the graph as well. So kind of shifting governance. And I think, the killer app will really be social media. And the best way to use social media within Web3 is to index and query that data via the graph. So I'm excited for that use case. And then, of course, the metaverse, and not like this dystopian Facebook-controlled metaverse, but the real decentralized metaverse where we can maybe even model things in medicine before we bring those into the physical world. So I'm super excited kind of about what the future holds. And I'm sure there's so many use cases that will leverage the graph that we can't even imagine or fathom today.
That's really great to hear. So it's really like a wealth of different applications. And Tegan, what I like about this, we're not just talking about finance, right? I mean, you're a finance person, so maybe that comes natural. But like to me as an engineer, like finance is not actually the most exciting thing on the planet. It's literally like you mentioned, like the social apps, right? The things that make humans interact and talk to one another. So, and at the same time, I find it then even more surprising that there's some of these Web 2.0 founders who are recently maybe dunking a bit too much on Web 3 movement. And, what do you make of that? And maybe how do you think this Web 2 versus Web 3 is gonna pan out, and where does it take us from here? So are these Web 2 services going to integrate like the graph and other Web 3 infrastructure, or like how's that going to play out?
Totally. Yeah. So I think Moxie, so he's a co-founder of Signal, have a ton of respect for Signal being like one of the only encrypted messaging apps that everyone should be using. But I kind of encourage this kind of criticism. I think like we need to critique every piece of centralized infrastructure that exists within Web3 until it's decentralized. I guess the way where I differ from Moxie is Web3 is being built. Like the Web3 stack is coming together. I think it'll be ready in the next like 6 to 12 months for mainstream adoption. Right now, the pieces are still being put together, and there are still centralized pieces that need to mature so that they can decentralize. And if we just recreate the central points of failure that exist within Web 2 and Web 3, we've totally failed at this mission. And so I guess to answer your question about like Web 2 versus Web 3, like, do I think Facebook or Instagram or Twitter will ever be Web 3? Probably not. I think what's happening right now with NFTs, it's like an easy way for Web 2 companies to kind of dip their toes into Web 3. But I kind of compare it to, I don't know if you remember like 6 years ago, like a lot of Web2 companies, institutions were like, oh yes, blockchain, but not Bitcoin and not tokens. Like, cool. We've had that for 35 years. It's called a database. Like nothing is there. It doesn't make
That's a
sense. But
great,
good for you.
yeah.
Thanks for validating our blockchain. And I think that's very similar to what we're seeing right now with NFTs. It's like an easy way for them to dip their toes in, but it will never be real Web3. And so, putting like centralized JPEGs on Instagram and Twitter and calling those like NFTs, like it'll never really be an NFT unless it's on a fully decentralized stack. So it's cool, but it's not what we're here to do. And I think like it comes down to incentives, and incentives are very much everything. So like with Web2, the incentive is generally gatekeeping data. Like they're there to, like, that's the way they monetize, is by gatekeeping the data and then selling ads and then selling us those ads and keeping our attention. And like, that's not what the internet's here to do. And I think like also it comes down to like protocols versus platforms. And these centralized companies are platforms, and they've built an entire tech stack that's centralized. And you can't just take a centralized tech stack and turn it into a decentralized one. Like it's very hard to build decentralized tech. And, we've been building it for 6+ years, right? With Ethereum and the Graph and Arweave and other really great protocols. But the great thing about protocols, and why I believe protocols will win, is because you can have redundancy. So like if Google goes away, so Google built its tech stack in a centralized way. Facebook built a very similar tech stack in a centralized way. So much redundancy has happened, but if those companies go away, all that developer work is gone. With protocols, everyone uses those protocols, and all that changes is like the user experience. So if that centralized company's user experience goes away, the protocol is still there. That tech stack is still there. So that's kind of why I'm excited about Web3 and why I think it'll be like much cheaper, much more resilient, and yeah, just all around better.
Yeah. Now, resilient is a nice word. I think resilience is all what this is about, right? And people think a lot about decentralization, and I think you made some great points why decentralization is important. So one thing that I'm curious about is what's your take on privacy in that stack? Like, how do you see privacy in the Web3 world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all of like the Web2, all of the centralized web will move to Web3. All of centralized finance will move to Web3. With that, like privacy is such a core and like prime component. I think solving privacy is very hard. I dedicated 2 years of my life to doing it, and it was difficult, right? And so I think like the graph solves this public open data verifiability piece, but you need to pair that with privacy. And I think privacy needs to be encrypted. Like think about your social security number, the amount of money you make, your credit score, like you don't want that to be public. And so I'm really excited to see that internet move to the Web3 space. But in order for that to happen, we need to solve this privacy piece. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how that coexists, right? Because with DeFi, like if there were private components, like say, for example, I wanted to keep my components private, but other people wanted it to be public. I don't know if that like DeFi would have taken off in the way that it did. So I think we have to like solve it in a very well thought out way. And it's also been interesting to see like with Monero and Zcash, like it's really hard to verify the data, to verify how many tokens are out there and all of that. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of how we solve privacy within Web3. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's for me, privacy is one of the two pillars that make really for resilient infrastructure. Totally. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see also kind of the stand of the regulators, right? So I think especially in the US, we've seen like regulators taking a bit of harsh stance on kind of privacy things. Like, what's your take on that? Are regulators kind of, who are protecting or kind of delisting or forcing exchanges to delist privacy coins? Is that something that is like protecting the people? Is that something that is, going against the Web3 movements? Where do you put that on the map?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we as founders in this space need to do a better job of educating regulators and kind of helping them understand what's happening, and maybe doing a better job at kind of working together with them. I think within this space, there's a lot of individuals that are very passionate about ignoring the regulators, ignoring governments, and just going forward. And I think that in order to bring this to fruition, we will likely have to help and kind of coexist with regulation. And so I think we need to kind of do a better job at educating and helping people kind of see the benefits. But another thing is like, this is why decentralization is so important, right? And like Bitcoin really holds the line, and you know, different people have different opinions on like the Bitcoin maximalists, but they really hold the line for true decentralization. Like you cannot shut down Bitcoin because it becomes a freedom of speech issue, because anyone can run a node in their home and all you're doing is publishing numbers. Like you cannot, as a government, tell me I can't do that. And so I'm really grateful to Bitcoin for holding that line, because I think that is propelled into the crypto space. But yeah, I think that's why we need kind of more and more decentralization. And that's why it's important to remove all of these like centralized points of failure.
Awesome. So I definitely hear Tegan is a decentralization maximalist.
I think so. Yes, I think that's fitting.
That's cool. All right. Tegan, tell me, when I hear about crypto, also when I got started in crypto, many times it's like dark sci-fi, right? It's like, it's basically, you know, cyborgs taking over. It's Terminator and, you know, Skynet. What I find really positively surprising in the Ethereum system specifically is this notion of solar punk coming in, right? Like a brighter future. So along those lines, tell me a little bit, what is your bright future for the end game? Like what is like your positive outlook that you hope for that we get to?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Web3, we are giving the power and the control and the decision-making and the ownership all back to the user. And that's really what it's about. And within Edge and Node, like we envision a world where people have the information that they need to make decisions. And it's an equitable and transparent system that we are working within, and it's working for the user, right? Rather than the other way around. And I want to help empower people to solve the world's most pressing problems, right? Like with Web2, we're selling people ads. So it's like contributing to consumption and consumerism. And you're also trying to keep people on applications as long as possible. Like that's not what the internet was created for. And so I'm excited with Web3 to change that, to change the incentives so that instead of it being around like monetization and money, though of course that still exists within Web3, we can change it to be around solving social issues like greed, misinformation, like all of the social, like war. Like I think we can use this to really scale humanity and make positive impacts on the world. And so that's why I'm passionate about the Web3 space.
That's awesome. Now, in order to get for this Web3 space to get there in a meaningful fashion, and I have to discuss, I'm not asking about the graph specifically, right? But like the wider ecosystem, how long is that going to take us? Is that something that happens next year? Like, you know, how long does that take?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it's like the next 6 to 12 months. So a lot of these pieces of the Web3 stack have been created. They just need to start talking to each other. Some still need to launch, but they're like in the final stages before they launch. Like we've gone through many bear markets, me and the other founders in this space, you as well. Like we have worked so hard to bring this to fruition. And I think a lot of the founders in this space that are building this Web3 stack, they are in this for the right reasons, right? They're in this because they want to make a positive impact on the world. And I'm excited for all of that to kind of come together, start talking to each other, and then we can have truly decentralized applications. And then Moxie and other Web2 individuals that are kind of criticizing the space will instead join in and start building on these protocols. So I'm super excited. But yeah, I would say like 6 to 12 months and we're ready.
Awesome. That is actually very positive. Tegan, finally, what is a message you would give for somebody, you know, maybe like you, like both of us, like pretty much everyone in crypto who's considering getting all in, you know, I don't mean financially, but quitting their job and moving over to the Web3 ecosystem. Like, what's your message to them?
Do it like that. There's never been a better time than now. There's so much money in this space. We are lacking talent. Every founder that I know, like us included, we have like 10 different open roles. Also, like you don't have to be a developer or an engineer to get into the space. I think that that's like a common misconception. Like we're creating a new internet, we're creating a new financial system. We need all skill sets and individuals. So like marketing, business, like all of it. We need you. We need your skill set. And then also like another thing is like, you don't have to get paid in crypto. Like a lot of people get salaries in fiat. And so you don't have to worry about like what you need to live fluctuating and being as volatile as the crypto market. That's just another misconception that I hear a lot, but there's nothing better to work on in the world than this problem. And I think there's the most opportunity out of anything we've ever seen right now. Like I compare this to early days in finance. I compare this to like early days in tech. Like there will not be, I don't think in our lifetimes, I don't think we'll see another opportunity like this.
That's wonderful. I think it's very empowering to hear that from you, Tegan, who, didn't just make that step, but made it so successfully. Oh. Tegan, that's it from me for today. Thank you so much for joining us here, and all the best to everyone over there. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Talk to you all soon.